Modern and ancient Greek are two different things, but how different? Could a modern listener understand an ancient speaker? To start with, we have to recognise that Greek has evolved in stages. Like English, and in fact like any living thing, it has changed slowly over time, and the level of difference depends on where you start measuring. We today can understand the speeches of Theodore Roosevelt from 100 years ago, yet the works of Chaucer from the 14th century mostly elude us, and the epic tale of Beowulf, over 1,000 years removed from the language of today, requires specialist training to read. Greek, like English, has changed over time, except it has changed far more slowly. Our starting point will be in the 5th century BC, with the dialect of Greek spoken in Athens. The Athenian dialect is called Attic, after the land of Attica, where Athens is located. This is a good place to start, because Attic Greek is the main ingredient in the later stages of the language, and was highly prestigious because of the famous Athenian philosophers, historians and politicians who wrote in this dialect. A key thing to note is that the Greek alphabet is mostly unchanged from antiquity. This helps modern Greeks to understand ancient texts, but conceals many changes in pronunciation. Here is the word for outrage or affront. A Greek of today would say ivris, but an ancient Athenian would say hubris. Ivris, hubris. As a side note, this is where our word hubris comes from. First up, the sounds. It would be laborious to recount every sound change here, so let's focus on the main ones. First, the vowel system, for instance, is greatly simplified in modern Greek. All the letters you are seeing on screen right now make the same sound in modern Greek, an E sound. The reason these separate spellings exist is that once they did all have different sounds. Ancient Greek vowels also distinguished between length. There were long vowels and short vowels. For example, perre means he carries, while perre is a command, carry. The only difference is the length of the last vowel, with epsilon iota representing a long E. So modern Greek has far fewer vowels to play with. Now consonants. Many of the plosives of ancient Greek have become fricatives. A plosive is a sound like P or T, whereas a fricative is like F or S. Ancient Greek had 3 series of plosives. There were the voiced plosives, like B, D and G, and then there were 2 types of voiceless plosives. There were aspirates, which were pronounced with an extra burst of air, and there were plain versions without aspiration. When Romans wrote down Greek words, they marked the aspirated versions with an extra H to represent that bonus burst of air. Philip, with that PH diagraph, comes from the ancient Greek Philippos. Same deal with TH. But we don't call Philip Philip, or Theodore Theodore. And the reason PH and TH represent fricatives in our mind is that the ancient Greek aspirated plosives evolved into fricatives. P became F. Around the same time, the voiced plosives did too, except they became voiced fricatives, whereas the aspirates remained voiceless. As a result, modern Greek has a greater ratio of fricatives to plosives than its ancient form did. Of the Attic plosive series, only the plain voiceless plosives have survived mostly unscathed, although even they have changed in some circumstances. A word like potamos, with lots of plain plosives, is pronounced today pretty much as it would have been in ancient Athens. But the name of the goddess of love, with its aspirate and voiced plosive, has gone from Aphrodite to Aphrodite. I hope that, like me, you find the study of languages fascinating, and for ancient history, of course, learning languages is a must, whether that's Greek or Latin so you can read the ancient texts themselves, or modern languages so that you can read scholarship on the subject. Learning languages opens many doors, and that's why I'm happy to announce this video's sponsor, Lingupy, the immersive language learning tool that teaches you while you watch TV. Lingupy uses immersive double subtitles in your mother tongue and your target language. There are thousands of shows and movies across 14 languages, and naturally I gave its Greek catalogue a go. and because I like history, I naturally turned to its selection of documentaries. I could learn about Greece, about its history and culture, all the while getting natural, immersive exposure to its language.
With Lingapai's Say It feature, you can practice repeating the line of dialogue you just saw on screen. Take this for example.
No sabía nada, lo juro.
No sabía nada, lo juro.
Is there a word you want to highlight? Γεννήθηκε. Let's see. Γεννήθηκε. He was born. I can make a mental note, while Lingapai pauses the video automatically.
And better yet, you can study these words with their automatic flashcards and quizzes.
One of the main reasons I and many others like to learn languages is to immerse ourselves in the culture that these languages come from, and Lingapai lets you do that just as you learn. So don't delay. Learn some Greek with Lingapai today.
With a 7-day free trial and 55% off the annual plan, there really is no better way to start your language learning journey. Check the link in the description to claim.
In a limited way, ancient Greek also had tone. You see, in English we have stress. One syllable of each word is pronounced with more force than the rest. This is how it is in modern Greek as well. In ancient Greek, however, there was a pitch accent system, by which one syllable had a higher pitch than the rest of the word. This system was inherited from Proto-Indo-European, the ultimate ancestor of dozens of languages in Europe and Asia. A pitch accent system parallels stress in that it affects usually only one syllable of a word, although there are exceptions to this in ancient Greek. Contrast this to a fully tonal language like Chinese, where a variety of tone types can be put on every syllable. This system was eventually replaced by a stress system, like we have in English, with one syllable being pronounced more forcefully than the others. This is how it is in modern Greek. I have a selection of words to compare, which should illustrate the biggest differences and also the biggest similarities. Nesoi, Nishi, Athena, Athena, Barbaros, Varvaros. Okay, that's enough about phonology for now. If you're liking the video so far, make sure to subscribe. Anyway, let's continue. The grammar of Greek, like it sounds, has undergone major changes over time, but considering that 2,500 years separate modern and Attic Greek, the language has actually changed quite slowly. Greek was, and still is, what we call a fusional language, which is best illustrated with an example, the verb endings. We can see each verb ending represents a combination of number, i.e. singular or plural, and also person. Or, the first person singular ending conveys both bits of information at once. It is singular and it is first person. That is to say, it means something like I. We cannot break it up and point to one part as meaning it is in the first person and another as meaning it is singular, and instead both aspects of its meaning are considered fused together. If you're interested, languages with the opposite system, where each affix does correspond to just one bit of information, are called agglutinative. So Greek grammar is fusional. It is also quite tricky, with very many verb endings, but like many other Indo-European languages, Greek has trended away from complex morphology towards more analytic structures. That's a fancy way of saying that nowadays each word has fewer grammatical forms and fewer endings, and instead grammatical information is conveyed through a greater number of words, for example by deploying an auxiliary verb. One example of this involves the perfect tense. Ancient Greek had a perfect tense, meaning something like I have done, which involved reduplication. So the verb pao, I stop, becomes pepauka, I have stopped. The P is repeated. Except these perfect tense forms were eventually dropped, and the language innovated a new perfect, which combines the verb to have with a different verb form. To say I have stopped in modern Greek, one could say echo bafsi, using two words instead of one and borrowing the form bafsi from elsewhere. Like every old Indo-European language, verbs represent by far the most grammatically complex part of the language. At most, an ancient Greek noun can expect to have 10 commonly used forms, but maybe less, while an ancient Greek verb has over 70 forms, just counting the present tense. I can't be bothered to count every form, but it must go into the hundreds, and this is because ancient Greek verbs have a lot to say. To convey all this information, the ancient Greek verb makes use of suffixes, prefixes, infixes, and also alters the core verb stem in various ways. The modern Greek verb has retained much of this inflectional morphology, while dropping certain parts. Nouns are the less complex part of Greek grammar, and also have a fusional system of endings, which has been reduced over time. They inflect for number, and also for case, nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, and vocative, meaning that an ancient Greek noun will have 10 commonly used forms at most, although in practice it is lower. Now let's compare the ancient and modern forms of this ancient Greek noun. Notably, the dative has been dropped altogether, but otherwise the endings have remained remarkably constant for this noun. Others have been eroded more, such as these. Not only have most forms become identical outside of the genitive, but the plural endings have been completely remodelled along the lines of a different paradigm. The term for this, when different forms of a word collapse into a common form, is levelling. Like levelling out bumpy ground, all the differences are removed. Levelling is a very common phenomenon in Indo-European languages. But what about the plural endings? Not only are 3 of them identical, but they do not resemble any of the prior plural forms either. We call what has happened here analogy. Analogy is when the speakers of a language adapt different sets of endings onto a noun or a verb or any other thing, displacing the prior endings in the process. And it is a very helpful concept for understanding the regularization of a language's grammar. Let's use an English example. What is the plural of matrix? If you said matrices, you are correct. S is the almost universal plural suffix in English. But if you said matrices, you are also correct. Matrix is a borrowing from Latin and has an irregular plural.
To simplify and regularize things, endings are brought over from another grammatical paradigm, and the prior endings are displaced.
And so matrices falls by the wayside and is replaced by matrices. Give it time and no one will say matrices anymore. Just ask the poor old plural of forum, which has been lost to all but nerds. Anyway, to summarize, for the ease of memory, forms were brought over from other nouns to the plurals on this one, a process called analogy. So far I have used Attic Greek as the standard for ancient Greek. But another way we can compare ancient and modern is by examining the dialectical variation. Much like other national languages of today, Greek is relatively standard across all of Greece, thanks to the widespread education and interconnectivity of the modern age. That said, there are some divergent dialects today, such as Greco, spoken in southern Italy, Tsakonian, spoken in the Peloponnese, and Cypriot Greek, spoken on the island of Cyprus. These have significant differences from the standard language, but are not very widespread. In ancient times, it was very different. Dialectical variation was massive, and it has been said that some of these dialects were really much more like languages, well on the way to full differentiation. There was Attic, of course, but other famous dialects include the Ionian and the Doric spoken by the Spartans. It was mostly the vowels that differed between dialects. The Attic and Doric pronunciations of the word for mother were meter and mater, respectively. So there would have been a large degree of mutual intelligibility, but some words would surely have caused trouble, like 20 for example. In Athens, the word for 20 was ekosi, but in Sparta, one of the Doric versions of the word for 20 was wikati. By comparing these dialects, their differences, and the features they share, we learn more about the prehistoric stage of Greek these dialects all came from. For example, if you've studied ancient Greek, you will be familiar with the word for house, oikos. Except this is the Attic word. In Doric, it shows up as woikos, something mirrored in some other dialects. This allows us to work out the earlier form of the word as having a W, which the Attic dialect later dropped. And this fact helps us relate oikos woikos to cognates in other Indo-European languages. The Latin word vicus, for example, which also means house, or the English ending wick, which appears in place names like Warwick, Gatwick, and Berwick. These various dialects were taken by their speakers to Greek colonies all across the Mediterranean during the Archaic period, roughly from the 9th to the start of the 5th century BC. But all this variation was not to last. Attic Greek was adopted as the language of the court in Macedonia, the kingdom of Alexander, and when in the 4th century he conquered the known world, the Macedonians took Attic Greek with them. Gradually, as the new Hellenistic age took shape, a new dialect, based in large part on Attic, became common across all of the Greek world. Fittingly, it was called Koine, the common dialect. The other dialects, the Doric that the Spartans spoke, the Ionian in which Herodotus wrote, were slowly assimilated into this new super-dialect. Koine Greek, the common tongue of the Hellenistic age, would continue to evolve to produce the modern Greek still spoken in the streets of Sparta and Athens to this very day. So, to summarise, modern Greek is quite different from ancient Greek, although some sounds have remained identical, and I think a modern speaker would find it very difficult, if not impossible, to understand a 5th century Athenian speaker. That said, the constancy of the alphabet, over its 2,500 years of existence, means that reading ancient Greek texts is possible for modern speakers. And indeed, many of the concepts like the fusional grammar and the endings do transfer between the ancient and the modern language. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This is Atlas History, and I hope you stick around to watch more of my videos.
I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. It's really your support that makes the channel possible. In particular, I'd like to thank my 1 Augustus tier patron, Average at Best, my Caesar tier patron, Moulay Cherkawi, and my 2 Consul tier YouTube members, Dan Smith and Evgeny Volkov.